continue with the message of today, we find that the reason that the doors were locked, of course, when Jesus appeared, they found that they were very afraid because of what had happened to Jesus. They figured that they were next to be crucified because they were the followers of the Christ. So when he appeared, there was quite a turmoil within the room. To say some were, because there was a mixture of people there. There were some Greeks there and different people from the community, not all disciples. So it was a group of people that really they wanted to know more about Jesus, and he was there. And of course, he was there with the holes in his hands and the holes in his side. For some reason or another, John did not mention the holes in his feet, but that was just something that was omitted for whatever reason. But John, as you remember, he is the disciple that Jesus loved. It was important that he come and show, because they didn't really know what to believe. This was a time of confusion, and a time even the curtains were pulled, as we read, so that no one could see in and take advantage of the situation where they were all together. Now, so there was a difference, among those that were in the room. And we know later what happened. But, it's like any group that you have, whether it's a business meeting or a church meeting, there's going to be people that have a different opinion of what's going on. And this story comes from Northview, but I wanted to tell it because it means a lot. And I won't mention the names of the people, but we were in our circle room because that's all we had at the time. So this one, they had been on, a few of them had been on a very long bus trip together. And I listened to one of the participants in the bus trip, and the trip was over and they were back, and I said, "Hey, how was the trip?" "Oh, that trip was, I can't tell you what a great time we had on that trip. We sang and we sang and we sang. And we just had a glorious time. Every day we sang songs." So I go over to her husband and I say, "Hey, gosh, I hear it was what a trip that you had. So how was it for you?" He said, "It was horrible. I'm telling you. They sang and they sang and they sang day after day." So it was one of those things that, you're always going to have a different response from things that happen wherever you work, or as I say, whatever you're doing. So it's interesting to note that there's always a little bit of confusion that goes on. So again, we go back to this situation that John wants you to remember some things from his writing. And number one is that this is so important that all of us in this room remember the fact that Jesus came to earth as a baby. And he was like a lamb that ended up in a manger. And that was God came to earth in flesh and bone and blood. And we need to remember that, because he walked among us like a common ground, like a common man, for many years, and somewhat like all of us, that we have flesh and blood around us. But also the fact that this deity, point number two, is that he was the Christ, he was the King. He came directly he was God's Son. And we remember that this is such a change in the world that we see the Christ child right in our own community preaching. And the other thing that is so important John wanted to impress upon us is that God, in the form of Jesus Christ, was love. The love of God has changed the world in so many ways, and it's still changing. But there's no greater gift than the love of God. Because regardless of who you are, where you are, it was for the whole world to see him and believe that he loved us before he came to earth. He loved us before there was an earth. So all of these things that you need to know. But love, and the whole point of the love is that he wanted us to love one another. Regardless, because everybody from day to day, you can ask my wife sometimes, is he lovable all the time? And I'm afraid the answer might not be what I would like to hear. But at any rate, that is one of the things that we have to remember, that we have to love the unlovable at times. So that might not be something that you really desire for the neighbor or the person maybe that's sitting next to you. Of course you love them, but sometimes they really need you. And the last thing that John wanted you to remember, because this is the disciple that you remember that Jesus loved. He wanted you to remember from the cross, he said, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And that didn't include just this small body here, but it included the entire world. If you can fathom that, the entire world. Now he is, John's fourth point is that he wants you to remember that God is Jesus Christ, God in form of Jesus Christ is the Savior. He is your Savior. That word is so big, it's almost hard to think. Especially because, you know, most all of us have sinned in some way, and sometimes bigger sins than others. They're all sins. But just remember that He has forgiven you for all the sins that you've committed in the past and all the sins that you're going to commit in the future. So remember that He is your Savior. So those are the four things that was the purpose of John writing the book of John, and of course all these letters that followed as well. Now, personally, you know, I love the story of Jesus because Jesus had a mom, and we all had a mom, and then there was his earthly father in the form of Joseph. Now, Joseph taught a trade. That was the custom at that time. You learn how to work, and you learn how to provide a service to your community in some way or another. And of course, Jesus was a carpenter and also a mason, I understand. So he did many, many different jobs in the community. Carl Sandburg, one of the famous poets from his last years were spent down in North Carolina outside of Asheville. And he was at the 8th grade, he finished the 8th grade, and his dad came to him because they were immigrant parents. So they said, Carl, it's time for you to come and work. You'll have to give up school. And being the son that he was, he said, okay, Dad. So he learned a job. And of course, he went on to become world famous for his writings. And also, he played guitar and did folk songs, you know, around. He traveled, and really he lived kind of like a bum, if you would, for quite a few years. But it added to his life so much because of the people that he met, and the ones that he got to know and all. My dad was a whole lot like that. Here in Roanoke, his father came to him and said, Jack, you're going to have to come home and work. His dad was a builder. And he said, I need you to take charge of a crew and you go out. I'll teach you what to do. And you become the foreman on the job as soon as I can teach you how to do that. And he said his father would show up on a horse-drawn carriage with a wagon, and he'd go in and he'd inspect what was done that day, and he'd say, okay, son, tear all that you did down. It's not right. We want it. That's what our reputation is built upon, and the kind of work that you do. So he did those things, and he learned. And my older brother and my sister and me and my younger brother, and we all did the same thing. We learned, we all had jobs at that time so that we could be the person that he hoped us to become. And one of the things that growing up, because, I grew up when we were building a star up on top of Mill Mountain. And that star meant that we were living in the magic city of Roanoke, Virginia, because it was growing, it was prosperous, and churches were popping up on the corners, and it was a great period of time. One of the things that we had was trolley cars. Street cars is what we call them. And they had tracks that ran, right by Belmont Methodist Church. I could hear them when they would pull up, while church service was going on. But at nighttime, my older brother, he had a kind of a mischievous kind of behavior that Dad didn't appreciate a whole lot. But anyway, so what they would do is they would hide between the houses, and at nighttime, what they'd do, as a streetcar would kind of have to go up this grade and slow down, he would run out, and there was a big cord that you could pull the trolley part that had to ride underneath the wires to receive the current. And of course, the streetcar would stop, and the conductor would have to get out, and he'd have to go around and take the wire and put the trolley back up on top of that. So it was really exciting, but he thought it was a big deal to do that. So anyway, the streetcars was a big part, even into the late 1800s and into the 1900s. But it was such a big part of Roanoke because we had tracks running just about everywhere. But a streetcar, having to have power, is an important thing. The power is such, it just won't work without it. And we're much like the streetcar. Our power also comes from above. And if you're disconnected from that power, you're not going to be able to be on the track and the path of purpose that Jesus has for you in your own personal life. Now, he may at times have to put you over on the sidetrack, like was in my community, one of the sidetracks, because sometimes with illness, and sometimes it's suffering, sometimes those things are necessary to get you back on the track. So don't always be so sad about the suffering that you have to go through, because it probably has a purpose. So realize that God knows you personally, and he wants you to be as happy a person as you can possibly be. But mostly he wants you to realize those things that John said that he wanted you to remember is that Christ was here in flesh and blood, and that he was loved, and there is a king that loves each and every one of you here. And also that he is your Savior. So those things you need to remember. And I'll close with this story because it's important. And I think the reason that I'm standing here today, in December the 26th in 2004, there was a shaking of the world. And that was a tsunami that was in Indonesia. Me and the family, and some of you know the story. We were told, we were in Phuket, Thailand at the time, and we were told to run as fast as we could to get up the mountain because a big wave was coming. It was over 100 feet tall, 30 meters. And that day, as a result of that, over 280,000 people died. As I sat on the mountain with 5 grandchildren, 2 sons, a wife, daughter-in-law, we had nothing to eat, nothing to drink for quite a long period of time. But Peter, the 3rd child, he turned to his dad and he said, "Dad, are we going to die today?" And Mike, who was raised in this church, thank you, Lord, for this church, he said, "Peter," he said, we may die today." He said, "But that doesn't really matter